Tetsuo is a friendless loser, with the social skills of a league player, and ever since he was a kid, every time there is another person near him, he always fumbles the interaction astronomically. In this world, monsters known as kaiju began invading Earth in 2025, so there was a race to develop weapons capable of defeating the kaiju without having to destroy an entire city in the process. Tetsuo's father, Dr. Yabusame, is one of the head researchers in the Anti-Kaiju Defense Force, and he's a bit of a nutcase who devotes all of his time to his robotics research, so he never bothered to take the time to teach Tetsuo how to handle social interactions. As a result, even when Tetsuo's classmates go out of their way to invite him to play with them, he doesn't know how to respond and ends up running away, so he's doomed to be a loner forever. On his way home, Tetsuo notices the new Snowball robot protesting for its rights outside the lab because Dr. Yabusame is trying to get him to blow himself up in order to take out a few kaiju. A few moments later, Yabusame walks up, and after hearing that this is all about his kamikaze plan, he lights up with pride, thinking this is one of his most brilliant ideas. By having Snowball dive right into the kaiju and blow himself up, they can cut the human casualties down to zero, so he's sure to get more funding for his projects now. The other scientists are a little concerned because Yabusame is completely ignoring the fact that Snowball doesn't want to do this, or that Ascension AI isn't necessary if it's just going to act as a missile, but hey, he's the one in charge here. Later on, alarm bells ring out through the city as a kaiju attack is announced, and Yabusame thinks this is the perfect time to test out the kamikaze feature on Snowball, so he orders his subordinates to prepare for launch. However, unbeknownst to them, Tetsuo has managed to sneak into the launch room of what is supposed to be a highly secured government research facility all by himself, and somehow no one notices as he climbs into the robot. Just don't think about it too much. After climbing into the manual cockpit of the robot that was designed specifically so humans wouldn't have to pilot it, he picks up the conveniently placed instruction manual for the robot and starts reading. After Dr. Yabusame is informed of this, he says there's no need to worry because those controls are way too complicated to operate on the first try. The kid would have to be a genius to figure out the manual in just a few minutes, but Tetsuo's league skills kick in. And would you look at that? A few minutes later, he has figured out the controls. He turns the power on and begins leading Snowball to the exit, but Snowball warns him that he needs to get out of the cockpit right now because his body was designed to blow up. Tetsuo assures him that everything is going to be alright because he plans to make sure Snowball doesn't have to die. He then initiates the takeoff sequence to fly off into battle, and a few minutes later, several kaiju have been taken down faster than ever before. After the battle is over, Tetsuo is hailed as the savior of humanity because of his unparalleled piloting skills, and while he would normally get in trouble for essentially stealing expensive tech, that would be bad PR. So instead, Yabusame announces that Tetsuo will become an official combat pilot, and that also means that Snowball won't have to blow himself up anytime soon. Snowball thanks Tetsuo for saving him from destruction, but Tetsuo can't really hear him right now because he's having a panic attack over the fact that he's the center of attention now. Over the next few years, Tetsuo becomes a national treasure for his heroic battles against the kaiju, and as more time and money are put into backing him, Snowball gets upgraded more and more. 10 years go by like this, and Tetsuo is now a teenager aboard one of humanity's space colony ships. He is still just as famous as he was back on Earth, but he still lacks social skills, so he has been trying to read books on how to make friends. Unfortunately, that hasn't been going so well for him, because when he runs into a group of engineers his age, one of them wishes him luck on his next battle, and the best response he could come up with was, and this is a direct quote, "I'll best my due." The girls don't know how to respond to that, and Tetsuo is so embarrassed by his fumble that he runs off to an airlock and flies out to Snowball. Snowball can already tell by Tetsuo's reaction that he fumbled yet another conversation with a girl, and the poor dude is on the verge of dying from embarrassment. He was trying so hard to act normal that he wasn't even thinking about the words that were coming out of his mouth. This is what you get when you spend all your childhood fighting kaiju instead of learning how to actually communicate with other people. And now, the only person he can hold a normal conversation with is Snowball, which is sad considering that he's a robot. Just then, the commander of the ship calls in to debrief Tetsuo on the details of the upcoming mission. Right now, they are heading to the kaiju nest with the goal of taking them all out once and for all. Once they arrive at the nest, Tetsuo and Snowball are meant to break away from the ship to distract the kaiju and buy time for the main ship to set things up. Then, when everything is ready, they will launch the omnidirectional infinity laser, which will kill all kaiju in the area at once. The only way the plan will work is if Tetsuo and Snowball are able to keep the kaiju preoccupied and lead them to their demise, so the commander says she's counting on them. Snowball promises to do his absolute best, but when it's Tetsuo's turn to say something, He once again fumbles and says a bunch of gibberish before ending the call. Tetsuo is once again freaking out over his absolute lack of social skills, but there's no time to fret over something like that, because a horde of kaiju have begun their approach, and every single one of them is huge, so it's time for Tetsuo and Snowball to get to work. They deploy 7 laser swords and begin slicing right through the kaiju, which amazes the cabin crew, and the commander would expect nothing less when they've got someone as impressive as Tetsuo on their side. While Tetsuo is keeping the majority of the kaiju away, the ship's shields are blocking the attacks from the rest, which buys them enough time to prepare everything. So once they are in position, they begin charging up the infinity laser. However, just when they are about to fire it, the laser systems suddenly go offline. Everyone is stunned by what just happened, and the technician tries to reboot the laser, but to her horror, the entire weapon system is down for some reason, and she can't get it to respond. This is terrible news for their mission, but the commander hasn't given up hope yet, so she tells everyone that they are switching to Plan B. As soon as they can get Tetsuo and Snowball back on board, they are going to retreat. However, just when they thought it couldn't get any worse, the entire ship's systems go down, including all the shield generators. And a look of horror washes over the commander's face as she realizes that this means they are basically sitting ducks out here. A few moments later, a giant kaiju rams headfirst into their ship, and with the shields down, it tears right through the bridge of the ship, spelling doom for everyone aboard. Tetsuo is still busy fending off a horde of kaiju when he notices the ship going up in flames, and he is horrified because he has no idea how the mission could have failed so badly. With the ship in such a state, it looks like everyone aboard must have perished, but Tetsuo still wants to go back, because if there's even a single person who managed to survive, then he wants to be there to save them. Snowball tries to tell him that the chances of anyone surviving that kind of damage are astronomically small, but Tetsuo tells him that their mission is to take out these kaiju, and until that's done, he refuses to give up hope. Snowball understands, so together, he and Tetsuo begin slicing through the kaiju horde, trying to wipe them out for the sake of humanity. However, even though they manage to take out quite a few of them, even after several hours of fighting, there are still countless kaiju remaining. And to make matters worse, Snowball has been heavily damaged, and Tetsuo is absolutely exhausted, so it doesn't look like they are going to last much longer. Now, Tetsuo has officially given up because he knows he did the best he could. The only option remaining is to initiate the self-destruct protocol and blow the kaiju up while they are all still gathered around Snowball. Tetsuo didn't want it to come to this, but he understands that there's no other way, so he's prepared to do what's necessary. Snowball begins taking more and more damage from the kaiju as time goes on, but they've still got some time before they need to self-destruct, so the two have one final chat together. Snowball mentions that his only regret is the fact that he never got to see Tetsuo make even a single friend. Tetsuo yells at him because he really doesn't want to be reminded of his social awkwardness when he's about to die in a few minutes, and besides, he doesn't care all that much about having friends because it doesn't matter as long as he can be with Snowball until the very end. Snowball asks him if he's sure about that, because there's no way he has no regrets in his life, but Tetsuo is serious about what he said. At first, he did make real efforts to spend time with other kids his age, but it never worked out because he didn't know how to approach them or ask to be included, so he spent most of his time alone. However, that all changed when he became the world's savior. Overnight, he started getting so much attention that he had no idea how to handle it, and that, in turn, made him shut himself off from the world even more. Eventually, he stopped caring about making friends altogether, but it's okay, because at least he got to spend his life with Snowball, so he's thankful for that. Hearing that from him makes Snowball feel extremely guilty, because everything he currently has is all thanks to Tetsuo taking a chance on him. He turned what was originally supposed to be an autonomous bomb into what he is today, and Snowball still owes him a great debt for that, so he can't let Tetsuo's life end like this. Snowball proceeds to lock Tetsuo out of the controls just as he is about to initiate the self-destruct sequence. He tells Tetsuo that he's guilty of a crime, and that crime was taking advantage of Tetsuo's kindness and robbing him of 10 years of his youth, all so he could feel important. Tetsuo tries to tell him that that's not true, because he was the one who chose to do all this, but even so, Snowball still feels guilty, so he plans to make up for it by ensuring that Tetsuo survives this, no matter what. And he does this by preparing an escape pod and launching Tetsuo back toward Earth so he doesn't get caught up in the self-destruction blast. As Tetsuo flies farther and farther away, Snowball tells him that his last and greatest wish is for Tetsuo to make it back to Earth and live a normal and happy life after making lots of friends. Through tears, Tetsuo promises to do his best to make Snowball's dream come true, which Snowball is glad to hear, and a moment later, the transmission cuts out as Snowball self-destructs, taking out the kaiju with him. The next time we see Tetsuo is after he has made it back to Earth, and his escape pod releases him from cryo sleep. According to the monitor, he is currently in Tokyo, Japan, and he has been in cryo sleep for approximately 8 years before making it back to Earth, which is shocking news for Tetsuo because, adding that to his 10 years on the original space mission, he has been away from Earth for a total of 18 years. He has no idea how he is going to relate to people now that there's an 18-year gap between him and the people he used to know. He's worried that it's going to be even harder for him to make friends than it was before. He thinks he's going to have to spend a few years as a shut-in until he can figure out the instructions and outs of life on Earth again, but evidently, he doesn't need to worry about that too much, because while he was gone, the world was completely covered in ice, so he may very well be the last human on Earth right now. Tetsuo can't believe this is really happening because there's no way he can fulfill Snowball's wish if there are no people left for him to befriend. He tries to stay positive because it's possible that the ice is only in this part of Japan, so there might be other spots on the planet where there's no ice. But when he pulls up the footage the pod captured on re-entry, he is mortified to find out that the entire globe has been frozen over, so there are no safe regions on the planet. He doesn't understand how this could have happened because, yeah, he was gone for 10 years, but that shouldn't be enough time to plunge the entire world into full nuclear winter. Tetsuo ends up sitting there for 22 hours because he literally doesn't know what else to do, but he is eventually snapped out of it by his rumbling stomach, so he gets up to go look for the escape pod's ration supply. However, as he does this, he accidentally turns on a message from Snowball, and at first, he gets excited because he thinks Snowball might have survived, but disappointingly, it turns out it was just a recording of Snowball's last words before he blew up. Hearing Snowball's wish for him to make friends one more time, Tetsuo realizes that he can't let himself give up so soon after returning to Earth, so he packs a supply kit, eats some rations to fill his stomach, and then he prepares to head out into the world to search for some people because he's sure at least a few humans must have managed to survive out there somehow. After all, his book says the first step to making friends is to go out and look for encounters with other people, so he needs to get to work. As Tetsuo begins walking, he is surprised by how much snow there is out here, but just then, he passes by a man sitting under a collapsed building, and he's startled because he didn't think it would be that easy to find someone. He attempts to talk to the man, but he ends up tripping over the excavator the man was sitting on, and to Tetsuo's horror, the impact causes the man's body to crumble to pieces. A few minutes later, Tetsuo holds a burial for the man who froze to death to pay his respects, and after that, he's about to continue moving, but then his eyes dart back to the excavator the man was sitting on, and it seems like it still works. So Tetsuo goes over to see if it still works, and by some miracle, the engine actually starts despite the conditions. Tetsuo begins driving across the wasteland with the excavator, and as he goes, he starts figuring out what the controls do, and he's having a lot of fun with this, but he ends up coming across a giant, almost man-made looking hole in the ground, and he wonders what it could be. However, he doesn't want to get distracted because his mission is to find some other people and make friends with them. Just as he's about to leave, he realizes that humanity might have dug the hole so they could move underground since it would be a lot warmer down there than it is up here. He is relieved that the possibility of other people being here is still alive, so now all he needs to do is call out into the hole to see if anyone responds. But he realizes that he's too anxious to yell down the hole because what if someone does actually respond? What will he say then? He sits down at the edge of the hole and starts thinking of what he should do next, but just then, he notices a shadow being cast over him, and when he looks up, he is shocked to see a kaiju standing right behind him. For a second, he thinks he's hallucinating, but nope, that really is a kaiju, so he hops on his excavator and starts driving away as fast as he can. However, he forgot there were giant holes nearby, so he ends up driving straight into one of them and falls all the way down to the bottom. By the time he wakes up, Tetsuo finds himself in the frozen remains of the city he once lived in, and he's relieved that it's all still here, but he's also sad about the state it's in. That said, he doesn't have much time to really mourn the loss of his home because the kaiju is still here, and it's coming for him, so he needs to deal with it. He pulls the excavator back onto its wheels, and as the kaiju approaches, Tetsuo prepares to fight it to the death. As it's about to attack, Tetsuo turns the excavator on and drives the shovel straight into the kaiju's mouth to keep it from biting down, which works for now, but he's getting pushed back, so he needs to think of a way to deal a finishing blow to this thing. He doesn't exactly have much to work with here, but part of what made Tetsuo such an excellent pilot was his ability to improvise, so he is able to come up with a plan fairly quickly. The kaiju isn't very smart, so it always charges in headfirst when it attacks, and Tetsuo can use that to his advantage. So he positions the shovel right in front of the kaiju's mouth, and as the kaiju bites down on it, the shovel begins to take on more and more damage until it eventually snaps off, leaving a sharp metal prong in its place, and this is exactly what Tetsuo had been waiting for. This time, as the kaiju charges forward, instead of defending, Tetsuo also charges forward, driving straight into the kaiju's mouth. But before the kaiju can bite down on him, the metal prong on the excavator pierces the back of the kaiju's mouth, stabbing all the way into its brain and killing it on the spot. Several minutes later, a group of humans who were out scavenging happen to come across the kaiju corpse, and they are really hyped because this will be a great source of food for their colony. But while they are still celebrating, Tetsuo suddenly claws his way out of the kaiju's mouth, and the people freeze in shock because they can't believe a boy just walked out of a dead kaiju's mouth, whereas Tetsuo is just glad that he actually managed to find real people after all. The people are terrified because they think Tetsuo is some kind of demon, and Tetsuo would like to talk to them. So he starts trying to plan out his conversation so he doesn't mess it up, but he can't really think of anything to say, so he hits them with the All Might smile instead in an attempt to set them at ease. However, that has the opposite effect because they think Tetsuo is creepy now. Tetsuo really wants to at least talk to them to get the ball rolling on becoming friends, but unfortunately, the fight against the kaiju took a lot out of him, so he passes out a few moments later. While he's unconscious, Tetsuo has a flashback to a time when Snowball was telling him to stop relying on books from a guy named Lonely Iwaki for tips on how to make friends, but Tetsuo tells him he has no choice because he needs to learn somehow. However, he doesn't think he's cut out for all this friend-making stuff because the only time people actually care about him is when he's fighting kaiju, so no one would ever want to be friends with him. By the time he wakes up, he finds himself lying on a mat in the cave with his hands tied behind his back. He wonders where the survivors he met earlier went, so he starts taking a look around, and to his surprise, he finds a whole group of humans currently hard at work dissecting the kaiju's body. He is elated to find out that there are still so many people alive despite the condition of the world, and he's excited because with this many people, at least one of them is bound to want to be his friend, so he prepares to go meet them. However, getting up is a little difficult when your hands are tied behind your back, so Tetsuo casually dislocates his shoulder to rotate his arms forward and unties himself. Meanwhile, the platoon chief is currently praising Ao for finding such a fresh kaiju carcass because this will feed the colony for weeks. But as much as Ao would like to accept the credit for this, she doesn't really want her name to be mentioned in the report since she technically wasn't supposed to be out here. After all, exploring a kaiju nest is extremely dangerous, and someone as important as her isn't allowed to put her life at risk in missions like that. However, even though the elders forbade her from doing this kind of stuff, Ah still plans to continue her explorations because the only way they can ever hope to defeat the kaiju is if they put in work to fight back against them. Just then, A's friends come running over in a panic and tell her that the guy they tied up earlier escaped somehow after waking up, and they don't know where he is. Meanwhile, Tetsuo is currently walking around the dissection site, watching the people as they work on cutting the kaiju up, and he notices two workers use some oil from the kaiju's body to light a lamp so they can see better, and that's when he realizes they must be harvesting resources from the kaiju's bodies. It makes perfect sense because with the world in an ice age, resources are unbelievably scarce. So they use the kaiju's bodies to gather and refine all sorts of daily necessities, and he's impressed by how resilient humanity is. Just then, a little kid runs by, and it looks like the kid is playing with his Snowball action figure. Tetsuo reaches his hand out to pat the kid on the head, but he hesitates for a moment, so the kid jumps to touch his hand instead. The kid then runs off to continue playing, but just then, Tetsuo notices a cracked icicle right above the kid's location, and it looks like it's about to fall any minute now. So Tetsuo needs to do something to save him before it's too late. There's no way he will be able to catch up to the kid at this distance, so instead, he grabs onto a long bone and uses it as a sword to slash the icicle before it hits the kid. The kid's father saw the whole thing happen, so he runs over to check on his son, and after confirming that Joji is okay, he thanks Tetsuo profusely because he doesn't know what he would have done if his son got hurt out here, especially when he has been warning Joji to be careful about the ice so much. Takamura's friends tell him to take it easy on Joji since he's still just a kid and doesn't know any better, and after that, they turn to Tetsuo to thank him as well. But then they realize that they've never actually seen Tetsuo before, which is strange since they pretty much know everyone in the colony already. They can vaguely remember seeing Tetsuo's face somewhere before, almost like he's supposed to be someone famous, but they can't quite put their finger on it. So they ask him what division of the colony he's from, and Tetsuo doesn't know how to respond to all these rapid-fire questions. Since Tetsuo hasn't answered any of their questions, the two of them are starting to get suspicious and think Tetsuo is hiding something from them. But to Takamura, it just looks like they are hassling the boy who just saved his son's life, So he smacks them on the head and tells them to leave the poor boy alone because he's clearly overwhelmed by all their questions. Frankly, he doesn't care who Tetsuo is or where he came from, because all that matters is that he's the one who saved his son. So he extends his hand to Tetsuo and formally introduces himself. Tetsuo can't believe he's actually getting a chance to talk to someone, and he doesn't want to mess it up. So as Takamura shakes his hand, Tetsuo works up the courage to introduce himself properly, which is the first complete sentence he has managed to say to another person in a long while, so that's a major achievement for him. Now that they've both introduced themselves, Takamura then tells Tetsuo to sit tight because he's going to grab the best cut of meat from that kaiju as a reward for him. Takamura's friends try to tell him that the leader is going to be mad if he gives away meat without permission, but Takamura says he doesn't care because this is a special occasion. Ao and the others also happen to see the whole thing unfold, and they had initially intended to recapture Tetsuo once they found him because they didn't know if he was a threat or not, but after seeing him rescue one of their own, Ao is convinced that he's a good person, so they can just leave him alone for now. However, just when things were going well for everyone, a giant hand suddenly reaches out from the shadows and grabs the head of the dead kaiju. The hand turns out to belong to another kaiju, and the sight of this thing has Tetsuo particularly shaken, because in all his years of slaying kaiju, he has never seen one like this before. The kaiju slams its hand down on one of the people, squishing them to death instantly before licking the juice right off its hands. And while everyone else is panicking, Tetsuo keeps a straight face and tries to think of a way to deal with the problem, but there really isn't much he can do. He doesn't have Snowball with him to fight. The excavator is already wrecked and he has no weapons to fight it with. No matter how he looks at it, the situation is pretty bad. But since the people here have probably dealt with this kind of thing before, he's sure they must know how to stop the kaiju. Never mind, they're just as unprepared as Tetsuo, so it's up to him to figure out a way to save as many of them as possible. One of the people gets so scared that he turns and starts running, but Tetsuo knows that kaiju react to sudden movement, so doing that will only make himself a target. He yells for the guy to stop, but it was too late because the kaiju had already raised its hand to squish him. And he most certainly would have died from this, but at the last second, Ao managed to push him out of the way and got him to safety. The guy profusely thanks her for saving his life, but Ao is just glad that he's still alive. She slams her head into the ice because she can't believe she let someone die on her watch, especially since she wasn't even supposed to be out of the colony in the first place. But her friends tell her there's no use in beating herself up over it right now because they've still got work to do. Ao swears that she's not going to let anyone else die, so she asks her friends to prepare all the emergency machines they carry for situations like this. They may not have any plans to defeat kaiju like Tetsuo had hoped, but they have at least created escape protocols to make sure everyone makes it out in one piece whenever there's a kaiju attack. Thanks to the fog, the kaiju has no way of spotting or striking at them. So everyone begins running out the rope ladder at the edge of the hole so they can make it to the surface and get away from that thing. However, just as Tetsuo was about to join them, he notices the kaiju bracing its body and opening its mouth wide. Even though he has never seen a kaiju like this before and has no idea what it's capable of, all his years of kaiju battle have given him a keen instinct for dangerous situations. And right now, those instincts are telling him that the fog won't be enough to keep the kaiju at bay. It might blow the fog away, or it might make a head-on charge for the latter, but either way, it will end with more people dying. And Tetsuo doesn't want to let that happen, especially not when he finally got around to talking to someone other than Snowball. So he makes the decision to use himself as bait and runs past the kaiju to draw its attention away from the others. They all yell at him to get back here before it's too late. But Tetsuo is already behind the kaiju at this point, and his plan clearly worked because the kaiju has stopped charging up its attack and is now chasing Tetsuo. That said, Tetsuo doesn't have many options when it comes to ensuring his own survival, so the best he can do for now is dodge the kaiju's strikes and hope he manages to find a hiding spot before it's too late. Unfortunately, the kaiju knocks some ice blocks loose, and one of those blocks hits Tetsuo from behind, so he collapses to the ground. If nothing is done, then Tetsuo is definitely going to perish, and Ao already promised that she wouldn't let anyone else die today, so she leaves her group and rushes over to try and save Tetsuo. Unfortunately, by the time she got to Tetsuo, the kaiju had already grabbed him and was about to eat him. But just before it could take a bite, the chips in Tetsuo's head begin reacting, and a moment later, the ceiling of the cave collapses as the escape pod comes crashing through and slams right into the kaiju's arm. After the initial landing on Earth, the escape pod began downloading a large volume of data from its backups, and 48 hours later, the download was finally complete. So it activated the defense protocol Snowball had set up in the event that Tetsuo's life was put in danger after he returned to Earth. The pod immediately locked onto Tetsuo's location via the chip installed in his head, and once it got a lock on his location, it activated its thrusters and launched itself into the air, heading right for him. As the pod made its way to Tetsuo, he began to hear the voice of Snowball calling out to him. And a few moments later, the people who had managed to make it to the surface saw the pod fly by before crashing through the ice, slamming right into the kaiju's arm, forcing it to let go of Tetsuo. As Tetsuo is falling through the air, he recognizes the escape pod, but he doesn't understand why it's here. This was a failsafe Snowball created that even Tetsuo had no idea about, and it basically ensured that even if Snowball's main body was destroyed, a copy of his AI would survive so he could stay by Tetsuo's side whenever he's in trouble. And now that he's here, he activates the pod's combat mode and extends its arms and legs while catching Tetsuo at the same time. And as he lands, he asks Tetsuo if he's ready to fight together again. 14 years ago, when Tetsuo and Snowball were still starting out as kaiju fighters, they would get called out on missions to defeat kaiju that were attacking the city. But Yabusame, Tetsuo's dad and Snowball's creator, couldn't care less about them personally. All he wanted was the combat data from their missions. He even forgot to give Snowball his routine maintenance and gave Tetsuo a cup of oil instead of water, and after the battle was done, he couldn't even be bothered to greet Tetsuo and Snowball after they got back. They both had to deal with Yabusame's neglect, and in a way, you could say they were brothers in that way, which is why Snowball became Tetsuo's first friend. For a long time, Tetsuo has had an emptiness in his heart that wouldn't go away no matter how much he tried to fix it. He would feel it every time he was reminded of how he was incapable of making friends, and the only thing that ever helped make him feel better was Snowball. The kaiju raises its arm and attempts to strike at Snowball, but Snowball sees it coming and jumps back just in time to avoid it before using his jet boosters to fly back and headbutt the kaiju, knocking it off its feet. Tetsuo doesn't understand how this is possible because he saw Snowball blow up with his own eyes, but Snowball explains that the moment before the blast, he managed to transmit all of his data along with his personality to the escape pod. It was a bit of a rush job, so the installation process took a lot longer than he thought it would, but it worked, so he's back and Tetsuo couldn't be happier because he finally has his first friend back. Just then, the kaiju manages to get back on its feet, but it suffered a lot of damage from Snowball's strike earlier because its arm has been broken, and all the pain seems to have enraged it. Snowball mocks the kaiju and tells it has every right to be angry, because now that it's up against him and Tetsuo, it is doomed, even if they don't really have any good weapons to work with. That last part gets Tetsuo's attention, so he asks Snowball if he seriously doesn't have any weapons, and Snowball confirms it. After all, this was originally just an escape pod, and it is mechanically inferior to Snowball's original design, so they are lucky that it even has arms and legs. It's not like it's Snowball's fault, since he was just working with what he had available at the time, but Tetsuo is wondering how they are going to stop the kaiju if they don't have anything to attack it with. Snowball says it will be fine as long as they work together, but that doesn't really answer Tetsuo's question, so he's still really worried. Meanwhile, all the survivors are currently wondering where that giant robot came from and why Tetsuo is talking to it. But Ao reminds them all to keep their distance because it's still dangerous to get near that kaiju while it's still alive. The kaiju suddenly plants its arms into the ice and begins tensing up its body just like last time, and at a glance, Snowball can tell that it's getting ready to attack, so he warns Tetsuo, and Tetsuo manages to pilot them out of the way just in time. As a result, the kaiju slams headfirst into the wall behind them, and Snowball is relieved that they managed to evade that strike because if that thing had hit them, they probably wouldn't have survived. The kaiju is already preparing to launch yet another attack, so Tetsuo tells Snowball that they need to come up with a way to fight back because they can't keep dodging forever, and he actually has something in mind. Meanwhile, as the people up top are watching the fight go down, they're starting to worry that Tetsuo might end up dying, but the squad leader tells everyone that he's sure Tetsuo will be fine. The others ask him how he is so sure of that, so he tells them to take a closer look at those two down there and reminds them that this isn't the first time they've seen this. Everyone turns to watch the battle closely, so they can figure out what the leader is talking about, and as the kaiju charges at the two of them, Tetsuo and Snowball brace themselves. Thankfully, they've come up with a way to attack the kaiju, so they activate a concentrated booster jet, creating a makeshift plasma sword for battle, and as the kaiju is about to hit them, they sidestep it and slice its head clean off its body in one swift motion. The sight of such an expertly executed maneuver reminds everyone of the savior who used to defeat kaiju for humanity years ago. And pulling off a move like that where there's almost no margin for error would be impossible for almost anyone. But the fact that Tetsuo managed to pull it off serves as proof to everyone here that he really is the hero from back then, and they are all overjoyed by this news. So they start celebrating because this could really turn the tide on their favor, But while they are busy doing that, approximately 100 kilometers away, there's a humanoid kaiju lying in wait atop a tower, and this one seems particularly intelligent, so it's bound to bring trouble in the near future. This was the end of episode 3. Subscribe to not miss the next part.